Hola amigos, soy yo, el magnifico. Irish, el magnifico to you. So, you're probably wondering, why am I wearing this hat? Because I have just come back from visiting my friends in Cuba, where I smoked the big cigars, and they drank Cuba Libres all day and all night. So, I cannot tell you anything about my trip because after the Cuba Libres, I can't remember a damn thing. But I do remember this. So I turned on the TV today, and much to my chagrin, there's Erin Brockovich. Now, some of you may remember Erin Brockovich because they had a movie named after her. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty big deal, I guess. But, I've had a movie named after me too, and so did my dog. So she's not the only one who's all that hot. So the movie named after me, you may have seen it, was Blood of the Vampire. The movie named after my dog was, would somebody get that smelly hound dog out of this room, please? So you see, she's not so special. Both Francois Pierre and I, Irish Magnifico, have had movies named after us, just like Erin Brockovich. So why am I so upset with her? Because the movie? The movie wasn't that great. It wasn't that bad. It was a movie. So she went to a town where people were all dying right and left, and she convinced them all they had cancer, and the cancer was being caused by some local company that was doing stuff to their water and so on and so forth. They end up with a whole pile of money. So she now thinks she's an expert on the environment with zero credentials other than she had a movie made after her. Now, I was watching her, and she was talking about this thing recently that happened. You know what? I think that light is annoying. I'm going to ask for your indulgence while I get up and turn off that light that's up there that's like too bright, and do some adjustments. Even the best, even the finest, they do, on CNN and Fox and MSNBC. I watch all those stupid shows. They have trouble sometimes with their lighting, so hey, they're no better than I am. And they didn't have movies named after them. Ah. Okay, that's a little better. I'm going to try this here fancy light thing, which set me back at least $100. Not great. Oh, I know it. Francois, go get me that plastic surgery kit. Yeah. What do you mean you lost it? This damn dog. Okay, so she's on TV and she's being interviewed by some moron, and she's saying, oh, these people with the chemical, with the vinyl chloride cloud, and now they're all upset, these people, because they go to the government meetings and they get thrown out for being disruptive, and nobody's paying them any money, and plus nobody's paying them any money, and now these people are scattered all over the place because this train went off the railings in Palestine. It's New Palestine. I think they're calling it New Palestine because they don't want anybody to think that they're favoring the Palestinians over the Jews. Honestly, God, these networks. So, in New Palestine, in some state, this train went off the rails and fell over, and it was carrying a bunch of toxic gas. I think it was vinyl chloride or polyvinyl chloride, and it caught on fire, and there was a big black cloud up in the sky. Oh my God, it's a big black cloud. That must mean that, the death and the 4 horsemen are coming out of the sky to eat us. So all these people were all panicked, and the government ran in there and they cleaned up all the water and they cleaned up all the land, and the cloud dissipated by itself, I think. And then that should have been the end of it. Nobody got sick. Certainly nobody died. That's kind of follows. If nobody got sick, nobody died from this cloud. I'm not saying nobody died in the town from other causes. Somebody probably got hit by a car or something somewhere down this time period. What do I know? I don't read the obituaries. Get off my back. So nothing happened to anybody. And this was a while back. And she's like, this is just terrible. These people are scattered to the winds. And they've left their homes. And they're not paying their mortgages. And they go to the government for relief. And the government doesn't give them any relief. And then they complain and they make a lot of noise and and they get thrown out and so on. And I'm like, Erin, if they're behaving this way, but yet nobody died and nobody's gotten sick, and there's no evidence anybody did die or get sick. First place, of course, because I have. Of course, nobody listening to this diatribe on the television was asking her. First question I would ask her was, all these people that fled, did they quit their jobs? Did they get new jobs? Did they have jobs? Did they have jobs but they didn't go to them? What's the deal? Because usually when people live in a certain area, particularly a godforsaken place like New Palestine, I'm going to get cards on that. Well, fortunately nobody watches this, but if people did watch it, I'd be getting cards and letters. Hate, not praising me, hate cards and letters from Palestine. And, that's not a good thing, ever. So what was I even talking about? Oh, yeah, Erin Brockovich. So if these people, one, let's assume that they've left their jobs because of this, left their homes, not paying their mortgages, don't have any place to stay. There's probably living on, in the middle of a curb somewhere, across the street from some government house where they can get up in the morning and instead of shaving or whatever, they run across the street and complain to whatever government officials will listen to them, which apparently is no one. So if they're doing all of that, then the reason they're doing it is because they have irrational fears. And where are they getting these irrational fears? I don't know, Erin. Did you ever try looking in a mirror? I wouldn't recommend that. But I think maybe you bear some share of the responsibility. So enough of that. All I have to say to all of you who are watching, okay, I'm pretending that all of you are watching. All of you that I'm pretending are my audience, I want you to go out tonight if possible and get your little quarters together and run out to the movies and watch Blood of the Vampire. So that's all I have to say about Erin Brockovich. Now, I have another subject that is of concern to me, and that is these latest two decisions by the Supreme Court. And I hate it when the media talks about these things like, well, the ideologues on the conservative side said this, and the ideologues on the liberal side said that, as though these decisions were made on strictly ideological grounds and no thought to the legal issues involved. So, I'm a Democrat, as all of you know. But that doesn't mean that I always take the so-called liberal position. And neither do most people. Most people don't take a liberal position or a conservative position on most issues. They just think about them and make their own decisions about them. And most of us are pretty much middle of the road. If you watched my last podcast, well, you should have. Okay, so if you watched my last podcast, you would see that I came out strongly in support of that decision on affirmative action, because affirmative action is a zero-sum game. In other words, one person wins, someone else loses. And if you're talking about a slot at a university, and what Harvard was doing was really terrible. They were taking applications from Asians, and they would assign certain scores to grade point average and what kind of courses you took and what were your extracurricular activities and your SAT scores and your achievement test scores, which achievement tests and SAT scores are the highest number of consideration, and then after that is your grade point average, and after that is the courses you took and the degree of difficulty. Then they have other little odds and ends of things where they look at things like the character, the personality, what's the human being like. And they had a series of these questions, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but they could basically be rolled up into personality. And they were routinely taking the applications of the Asians and giving them zeros across the board on the personality traits, thus bringing their overall average way down, in the meantime giving high scores for personality traits to African American applicants, putting them way up. So they would say, well, these, the African Americans had higher scores than the Asians, so we admitted them. Now, I know you went to Harvard, you Harvard people, and I know you're a good school and yada, yada, yada. You're not, you don't have much of a football team, let's just be honest about it. It's like, who goes to Harvard? Well, people can't get into the University of Michigan. Yes, coincidentally, I also happen to go to the University of Michigan, but that's not why I'm saying that. I'm saying it because it's objectively true. And I've talked to a lot of Harvard grads who said, "Oh, I wish I could have gone to Michigan, but I couldn't get in, so I had to go watch Harvard games." And incidentally, I was working in New Haven for a couple of years, and I went to the Harvard-Yale 100th anniversary football game. Now, you would think that would be a big deal, right? You'd think the stand would be packed and have 100,000 people there. There's a 100th year anniversary of the two most storied football programs, except for Notre Dame and Michigan, in the country. There were like 10 people in the stadium. The stadium held a total of 15 people, so I guess that was a lot of people for the stadium. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. It was like going to a baseball game for the Tampa Rays and watching all 5 people in the stadium cheer for them. Well, 3 people cheering for them. The other 2 were with their babies and they were asleep. So it's like, these people have no football tradition. What a shame. I mean, John Harvard is doing a spin city in his grave. He was all about football. And basketball. I'm not, trust me, I'm giving him credit for everything, but John Harvard was Mr. Football, if you may recall. So, I know football hadn't been invented. Stop the nitpicking. It's really irritating. Okay, I do know what I'm talking about. Man, sometimes I have to make some things up. But aside from that, stop picking on me. I'm the host here, and I'm wearing this hat. Yeah, you don't have a hat. If you had a hat, you'd have your own show. All right. So the people at Harvard must think everybody else in the country is a complete moron, because they actually were presenting that to the Supreme Court as the reason for thinking, "Hi, Francois. Yes, you're a good boy. Yes, you are." So I'm lying. He's not a good boy. I just don't want him to bite me. So they're telling the United States Supreme Court with a straight face that they do have objective standards. Hence, look at the questions we ask and the scores we get. Well, you didn't get into Harvard for a reason. Yeah, because you're illiterate, and you only speak French, and you speak that with a bad accent. What? I'm busy doing this podcast. You told me to do the podcast, and now you're complaining. You know what? I got to take a pause here. This dog wants something. He always wants something. I don't know what he wants. Probably food. I fed him 3 days ago. What the hell? He's going to get fat. I'll be back. Okay, another mystery solved by Ed. Greedy little bastard was hungry. Now he's eating. Let's talk quietly. Maybe he'll leave us alone. So, Harvard's treatment of these Asian applicants wasn't just unconstitutional. It wasn't just unfair. It's downright vicious. How would you like to be an applicant to Harvard and have your official record saying that you have a lousy personality and no character? Now, have you ever known a Harvard graduate? Well, I've never known a Harvard undergraduate, but I have tried a number of cases against Harvard law graduates. And I gotta tell you, notice I'm dressed, I gotta tell you that every single one had a lousy personality and no character. So, as I said to Erin Brockovich, hey, maybe you should look at yourself in the mirror. So, I 100% do agree with that decision. It's not fair to take somebody who has succeeded from hard work and gotten high grades, as these Asian students often do because they work their tails off in school. And that's part of their culture. That's one of the reasons they succeed. I remember when, right after the Vietnam War, all those Vietnamese kids came over here and started high school. Many of them started their senior year in high school without knowing any English. And there was a whole bunch of them that year who were valedictorians of their class. Now, you can't tell me that those aren't people who value studying and who don't do hard work and don't deserve everything they get for it, including admission to Harvard. The other thing that's annoying is everybody acting like if you don't get admitted to Harvard, your life is over. Okay? Well, those of us who went to lesser schools, like Michigan and Indiana, when I went to law school, kind of resent the idea that if you don't get into Harvard, you can't have a life. Because, trust me, I've had a life. And I think a fairly successful one, resulting in the culmination of my having this podcast thing. So, how many Harvard grads can say they have their own podcast, especially while they're wearing a Michigan hat? Very few. So, I think there's 7 of them. So it's like that was a good decision, a long time coming, way overdue. Quit treating 17-year-old kids as pawns to rectify everything that was ever done to black people for the last 200 or 300 years in this country. They didn't cause the problem, they are responsible for the problem, and they are entitled to succeed on their own merits and not being used as some great pawns in a scheme to make some university look like America. That's not their role in life. Their role in life is to do the best they can and to be rewarded appropriately. So that's that, and I'm done with that. Now, you say, well, you sound like a Republican. No, I don't, because most Democrats feel the same way I do. So we had two other decisions that came down today, and I'm going to touch briefly on them, and we'll discuss them more in some detail. But I don't want this program to become even more boring and insensitive than it already is. But the one decision was on the student loan. Now that student loan thing, there's a lot of heat, not much light. The problem wasn't that the Supreme Court said, oh, you can't be forgiving student loans, we think that's a bad idea, or it's unconstitutional. What they said was the statutory framework, the statute that Biden used, which was an emergency statute which was passed right after the 9/11 attacks, to help people who were couldn't pay their loans as a result of what happened in 9/11. So it was a question of statutory interpretation, and they said Biden did not have the authority to use that statute. He misread the statute. The authority that he used wasn't given by that statute, and it wasn't implied by the statute. So he should have just found another way, or not done it, or the Congress should have done it. And I saw Biden give a speech afterwards where he excoriated the Congress for not doing something about it, and that's an appropriate criticism, and I agree with him. I think they should do something about it. I think it's terrible that people's lives are ruined because of this mountain of debt over their heads, which keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Often these people who got these loans that they couldn't pay back, they're victims. They're victims of these diploma mills, these for-profit schools, which are just terrible. They should never be accredited. They charge a lot of money. They get degrees that are worthless, and then they have to figure out how they're going to pay them back. That's not a good situation. It should be dealt with. But you don't deal with it by attacking the Supreme Court because of the Supreme Court's interpretation of a statute. And the predictable threesome dissenters, with whose politics I probably agree, but I don't agree with their approach to these cases. This is law. I'm a lawyer. I like to look at the law. I didn't hear anything from them which was an explanation as to why the court's decision was wrong on the merits. Instead, they attacked it as though the Supreme Court had made a policy decision and talked about what a terrible policy decision that was. And that's not the role of a judge. I'm sorry. It's just not their role. So you have policies made by the President and the Congress. You don't have policies made at the Supreme Court. And the irony is, I hear a lot of people from my side of the political spectrum attacking the Supreme Court and saying, well, the Supreme Court is replacing, I heard some law professor, and incidentally, why can't law professors ever speak with any inflection in their voices? They all talk like this in a constant monotone. It's like they write an oath of office. Well, I'm going to be a law professor. I will always talk in a monotone. I promise to bore my students to death. I was a victim of those people. So this law professor out there saying, well, if you look what the Supreme Court is doing, they're putting themselves up as the person to decide whether the Congress did the right thing or whether the President acted inappropriately in accordance with the law, and they're putting themselves up in that position above. Like, this is new? Has this character ever read Marbury versus Madison? That's the whole idea of the Supreme Court. That's where the Supreme Court gets its authority today. So to me, it's the dissenters who are trying are demanding that the Supreme Court, if they had their way, the Supreme Court would basically supersede the legislatures and the president because they would decide what's a good policy and they'd make a decision on that basis. And that's just wrong. So I agree with the decision that was, I can't say I agree with the decision. I haven't read the statute that carefully. So I don't know if I agree with it or not. But I do agree that their approach was not to set policy, and that the dissenters' approach was to try to set policy, and that, I think, is wrong. So the third decision had to do with this religious person who didn't want to be compelled to do a web page supporting gay marriage. And I don't know how I feel about the merits of that, but I got to shake my head, and this I really don't understand, because I generally respect the judges on the court, even the so-called conservatives, who are not always all that conservative, but particularly Judge Roberts, because I knew him before he was on the court, and I liked him a lot, and I've liked him a lot. I've had 3 decisions in the Supreme Court, 2 of them, which I hope we will succeed in overturning years of precedent in the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. Those 2 decisions were both written by Judge Roberts. So he's my favorite judge of all time. But I don't understand the standing issue here. Standing, you should know what it is if it's not a real difficult concept. It means if you're going to bring a case in court, you have to be impacted by the thing about which you're complaining. You can't go for a advisory opinion. And that, I think, is what this plaintiff was doing, and I'm surprised they didn't throw it out on the basis that she didn't have, nobody asked her to create a web page in favor of gay marriage or anything else. She just said, well, theoretically, under the statute, they could. That's not standing. So I don't know what they did there, and I'm disappointed. So we can talk about these more later. You know who is after me again. I don't know what he wants this time. He ate. Maybe he wants more food. I mean, I gave him a milk bone. What more does he want? He just ate 3 days ago. Well, okay, 4 days ago. He had a milk bone 4 days ago. Now he wants another one? Unbelievable. This guy never stops. But I do. I know you're glad to hear that. So, nice chatting with you. I hope I didn't bore you too much this time. All right, I don't care if I bore you too. I don't need to hear that. No, I really don't. No, that's it. No, goodbye.